different from everything else we've studied so far. So ecologism is very different from everything else we've studied so far because it's the first ideology that's not explicitly focused on humans. Right? So we're talking about a worldview that says nature as a whole is just as important as human beings specifically. Okay? So we're going to distinguish between environmentalism and ecologism. We'll see that not every way of being concerned about the environment is the same, and that there's important differences between ecologism and other ways of caring about environment, which we can loosely call environmentalism. Right, to do this, we're going to examine some ecologist and environmentalist theorists, and hopefully with an exploration of these theories, you'll be able to see the difference in approach. So the fundamental difference between ecologism and environmentalism is that environmentalism is when we're concerned about the environment, but with a focus on the impact for human beings. In other words, what if all the water got polluted, what would we drink, or what if all the air got polluted, what would we breathe, or things like that, right? We're still thinking about ourselves, and we're thinking of the environment as a thing that helps us. Okay, so environmentalism is therefore what we call an anthropocentric theory, anthro meaning human, anthropocentric meaning centered around humans. Against this, ecologism is what we call an ecocentric view, so it's centered around nature. And ecologists make a critical argument that nature has intrinsic value. Right? We learned a few weeks ago the difference between instrumental and intrinsic value. Instrumental value is where something is valuable for us because it does something for us. Intrinsic value is where it's just valuable just because it is. Right, so anthropologists, anthropocentric worldviews say that things are valuable because they're valuable to humans. And one of the main goals of ecologism is to critique the anthropocentric worldview and say that, well, one of the problems of society that we have today, which is called industrial society, is that more than ever before, it uses things for human purposes. And the impact that this has on the environment is substantial and unjustified. So all theories of environmental politics accept this concept of environmental crisis. So they would say that the way that the environment is today is sort of reached a critical point where the damage is significant and it's systemically caused. In other words, that all of the environmental problems of the world don't exist by themselves, but they're all connected to each other. And their connection is that sort of loosely linked to the way that a society is structured. So there are various components of environmental crisis. Broadly, we can speak of global warming, resource depletion, localized pollution, and species decline. Right? So global warming, most people now agree that it exists. I think the scientific community is roughly divided between 3% of scientists who believe global warming does not exist, and 97% who do believe that it does exist, and that human beings have caused it. So, I don't know, you have to almost say that science is wrong to agree that global warming doesn't exist now. Okay, so this is based on the logic that every decade after 1850 has been warmer than the previous decade, and that's roughly the time that the Industrial Revolution sort of became, at its critical mass. So, some cool graphs and stuff to explain the relationship between carbon dioxide concentration and temperature. The second part of the environmental crisis is resource depletion. So, commonly cited examples of resource depletion that will affect us probably in our lifetime is like running out of oil and stuff like that is probably bad for the current way that the world is because we use oil a lot. Rainforest depletion, so deforestation, is a major concern. Big forests like the Amazon, which produce most of the world's oxygen, are sort of being cut down and stuff. And there's valid human-centered reasons to care about that, even if you don't care about the trees themselves, I guess. And drinkable water depletion. So especially with the rising population of the world, the amount of drinkable water in the world is static. It's not growing. So having more people and the same amount of water, fairly obvious conclusion, water becomes more precious and there's more rivalry over it. So resource politics are likely to be an important area of politics for the future anyway for this reason. Localized pollution is one reason that many people get involved in environmental politics for the first time. You look outside and the sky is grey, you look outside, the air is unbreathable, stuff like that. So pollution that is part of your own environment is one motive cause to get interested in the environment. This critique is basically saying that, well, even if your particular area of the world isn't polluted, you're still part of this global structure of production, which makes you part of the pollution. Everything that you wear was produced somewhere, and therefore it probably had something to do with industry, and therefore had something to do with pollution. An example of the current debate around this is people drive electric cars now because they think they're being clean. But electricity is produced by coal-fired power stations, so really you're just producing the pollution somewhere else and not directly at the point that you're driving. The smoke isn't directly behind you, it's 100 kilometers to the west, sort of thing. So, localized pollution, I guess. Right, so some cool pollution pictures of Beijing. So the loss of biodiversity is the last topic within the environmental crisis, and this is a net loss of species. Now, we can say that species loss is bad in itself, that certain species of animal are valuable and it's bad that we've killed them. We can say that species loss is bad for human quality of life. That if there's fewer animals, I don't know, maybe we like certain animals and we're sad that they're gone. It's just a purely emotional attachment. Or maybe we like the taste of certain animals and it's bad that we can't eat them anymore, right? We like eating them. Or maybe their existence is beneficial for us. So for example, if all the bees died, we'd probably die pretty soon after that, right? Because bees sort of cross-pollinate all of the different plants and stuff that we eat. And so if they disappeared, many of the plants would disappear too, and then we'd die shortly after, right? So, there's both intrinsic and instrumental reasons to value species of different kinds and to make sure that they don't die. Right, so environmentalism, unlike ecologism, is probably compatible with lots of different ideologies. Right? From what we can see so far, ecologism seems special in a way, because it's the only ideology that is not centered around people. It's the only ideology we've looked at so far that says people aren't the only thing. You're just part of nature, you're not the whole nature, you're not the only thing that's important. Right? Whereas environmentalism is compatible with most other ideologies because it's sort of evaluating the environment in terms of what it means for us. So for example, we can link liberalism and environmentalism, and we can say that, well, if individual rights are important, if the environment gets destroyed, individuals get harmed. Therefore, we can establish a connection between liberalism and environmentalism, right? You could use something like the harm principle and say, well, companies that pollute the earth are causing harm, therefore they should be restricted in some way, either pay compensation or pay a tax or do something like that. Not many conservatives are environmentalists, but there's at least a theoretical possibility that the two things could be connected. Okay, so if there are features of our society and culture that need preserving, conservatives might argue that environment needs preserving too, especially in a culture that believes that nature is God, so like a pantheistic culture, I don't know, there's not many of those in Western societies. Like the pagans did exist, and now they don't, except for a handful of people who believe themselves to be pagans, but aren't. So if you're that type of person, you believe nature is God. If you're a Shinto person, or like some forms of Taoism or Buddhism, I guess, Hinduism, if you have this sort of worldview, then maybe you have traditions that believe that animals are sort of morally equal to you, that the environment's morally equal to you. Right? So that enables a link between conservatism and environmentalism. Right? Whereas if your tradition, society, and culture are rooted in Christianity, for example, it's much less easy to be an environmentalist, because the Bible says God gave man the earth and gave him control over it, gave him dominion over it, that it's a resource that belongs to you and you don't have to be worried about what happens to it, right? So if you believe that, it's much harder to construct a conservative argument around environmentalism. Socialists often link environmental consequences with the result of capitalism. In other words, they look back and say, well, when did all these environmental problems start? They began around the Industrial Revolution. When did capitalism start? It began around the Industrial Revolution. There seems to be some sort of link between the profit motive and between environmental devastation. So wherever the whole economic system is designed to produce profit, nobody cares about how much stuff gets destroyed, environmental problems will follow. Right? So socialists construct an argument that when capitalism ends, if we organize the world around human needs, this could include environmental needs as well. There's a possible way of solving environmental problems is getting to socialism fast enough before we destroy the earth. Right? Feminism and environmentalism are compatible. We sort of said that last week, ecofeminism exists. This belief that exploitation of the environment and of women is linked. But you don't have to be an ecofeminist to agree with environmentalism and feminism at the same time. If you're a liberal and you believe in environmentalism, you can be a liberal feminist and believe in environmentalism and so on. Right? So there's compatibility there as well. In the next subject, we'll look at nationalism. Nationalism is basically the belief that your own nation is significant, more morally significant than other nations. Right? If you believe this, then you believe that the land that you live on is important. And obviously, if you believe the land you live on is important, you can believe that the environment's important. So even nationalists can agree with environmentalism. And even fundamentalists can agree with environmentalism, right? So religious nutters, all those crazy people out there who believe God's talking to you directly and telling you what to do about politics, right? Even these people can believe that if God created the world, maybe it's true that you need to be respectful to the world that God created, right? It's at least theoretically possible to be a fundamentalist and an environmentalist, right? So I guess then I'm showing you that the broad spectrum of different ways of thinking are compatible with environmentalism, whereas ecologism is probably not compatible with any of those perspectives at all. Okay, let's look at some ecologist theorists first. This is Aldo Leopold, the American author, scientist, and forester, the inventor of environmental ethics. And his most famous book is A Sand County Almanac, which is basically a book of natural history and philosophy. And in it he advances a central concept which we call the land ethic. He looks pretty cool in the picture, I have to say. You got the khaki stuff, it looks like he blends in with the environment pretty well. So the land ethic is an argument that land is not a commodity. T-shirts and cars are commodities because they're theoretically infinite. You can produce more of them. If one gets destroyed, you just make another one. Right? For Leopold, land is not a commodity. It's an interdependent system. Firstly, you can't just make more of it. It's finite in a very specific way. And secondly, land is part of this community. In other words, we're not the only thing that lives on it. Right? There's this system that exists, a natural system. Right? So this contrasts sharply with a view that human beings are masters of the earth. Right? Leopold is directly confronting religious ideologies like Christianity, Islam, Judaism, that say human beings are masters of the earth. Right, so Leopold's perspective is if something helps nature, it's good. If something hurts nature, it's bad. That's really what that quote boils down to. Right, whatever helps the stability, integrity, and beauty of the living community is good. Whatever does not is not good. Right, in other words, we need to judge everything based on this one principle. So, central to Leopold's argument is a claim that if we look at the world as it is, we can find reasons to do things. We can find reasons for action. And this is directly challenging Hume and the conservatives. If you remember back a couple of weeks, Hume said that we can't make claims about people and how they should behave based on facts. We need some sort of sentiments or values or things in order to make a judgment about what we do. Right, Leopold is directly challenging this and saying we can learn from nature. If we go out and look at how nature behaves, we can learn from it. Okay? We'll evaluate this claim in a little bit, but so just remember it for now. Leopold's next concept is what we call the circles of concern, and Leopold makes the argument that our circles of concern are expanding over time. You imagine yourself when you were a young child, when you were just born. Whenever you wanted something, you screamed. You're hungry, you scream. You're tired, you scream. You need somebody to pay you attention, you scream. Right? So your circle of concern is you. You don't care about anybody else. Now when you grow older, hopefully you mature and stuff, and maybe you stop screaming. I don't know, you can tell me whether you did. but you stop screaming at people whenever you need something, right? Hopefully that's because you actually care about them. You actually respect your parents' human rights not to be screamed at or something like that, you know, and so you don't scream at them, right? So a more serious example, in previous versions of human society, we've tolerated slavery. You know, now most people don't. I hope nobody here believes in slavery. There's a general consensus in the world now that slavery is bad and should be opposed, right? Even though some people in the world are still slaves and slavery still exists, but nowhere near as much as compared to, let's say, 1,000 years ago. I think that's fair to say. So Leopold says that's the result of an expanding circle of concern. Previously, we didn't care about the existence of slaves. Now we do. Now if a slave exists, we're morally offended at the fact of their slavery. Right? That's an expanding circle of concern. So if our circle of concern has expanded from ourselves to our family to the former slaves to, you know, it's getting bigger, can it get bigger still? And can it include the natural world? Can we start caring about the natural world in the same way that we previously didn't, maybe, because we were focused on industrial society, and now can we expand our circle of concern and start thinking about plants and animals and our impact on them? So Leopold's concept of the land ethic was developed because he was a key member of United States government-led conservation projects in the 1930s and 40s. And the experience of these projects was like, well, the government put a lot of effort into convincing, into trying to protect the environment. And was that effort very successful? No, it wasn't. Right? And most of the problems got worse after the 1930s and 40s. Right? So his point is, like, why did things get worse? Why did the government-led projects not be successful? Right? And his argument for why they weren't successful is if we just leave everything up to the government, we don't cause enough change to actually change the problem in a fundamental way. And if the state gets sole moral responsibility for the environment, that's not enough to protect the environment. Because even as powerful as the state is, it can't watch us all the time, right? It will still do stupid things. And even as powerful as the state is, it doesn't lead us to question our behavior, our motivations, our beliefs, and the impact these things have on the environment. Right? So it's only when individuals change their behaviors and motivations can we change the environment. So in other words, Leopold is bringing the concept of individual responsibility, or at least social responsibility, into this discussion. He says, you know, the environment is not a problem we can just leave up to states, which is a valid criticism to make, because if you look at like what's happening now, that's basically exactly what we're doing. You know, the environment is a problem we leave up to government. We hope that the governments of the world can meet with each other at, you know, international climate conferences and work out a way to stop climate change. You know, and we sort of trust that they're going to do that. Right? Leopold's problem is that actually we have the power to stop climate change right now. We just need to behave slightly differently. You know, there's lots of things we can change about our society that would have a big impact on all of these environmental problems. Right? And it doesn't need the government to do it for us. Right? There's things you can do yourself right now today that can have a major impact on this. So Leopold uses a pyramid to demonstrate that nature itself is interdependent. You know, the very base layer of the pyramid, we have the soil, and then above that we have plants and insects and larger animals, and eventually humans and super big animals. Right? And the importance of this demonstration is to say that there's these big food chains that are natural energy pathways. You know, the small thing gets eaten by the bigger thing, all the way up to the biggest thing. And then we die, and then we go back to the earth and the soil, that sort of thing. It's a natural link, the circle of life, you know, cue music for the Lion King. The problem with industrial society for Leopold is that it upsets this pyramid, right? Firstly, by reversing evolution. So historically, whenever we've needed food, we've hunted for it. You know, we at the top of the chain killed the thing below us or something like that, or harvested something else, you know, ourselves, and then ate that thing, right? It's a very small link. The thing that lives next to us, we killed and we ate, right? Now, when we want food, we take it from a very far away place usually. You know, we certainly don't hunt for it. I'm pretty sure, I think I've asked this in class before, and none of you guys have ever hunted at something for yourself before. I'm not saying I'm some big hunting guy either. I think I've caught like a fish 3 times in my life. and that's the extent of my hunting. So, it's not like I'm making criticism and not including myself. I'm part of this problem too. So, we're shortening the food chain by removing certain predators from this equation. We're sort of just saying, oh, we're just going to take everything and, out of the system, but not give very much back to the system, I guess. So secondly, we exploit the earth, in other words, the soil and geological formations, and remove them from the natural energy chain. So one of the biggest things that has the biggest impact on the world today is mining, right? We take coal and iron and all sorts of minerals from the ground, turn them into manufactured products, and then put nothing back into the earth. Right? So clearly that's an example of taking things away. It's like a bank, I guess. You withdraw money from your bank account, you don't put anything back in, eventually you run out of money, right? Eventually that's a problem. Right? So, and then transportation makes the problem worse by bringing things far away from their natural environment. So if you go to a supermarket here in Macau, one thing you notice is that everything is from somewhere else, right? All of the natural produced things are from mainland China just about, or if you want to be fancy and you go to Park and Shop, you can get fruits and vegetables from Thailand or Korea or Chile or some other random place somewhere. Like there's Australian goods too, like things that are 10,000 kilometers away we eat here. Okay, so the argument here is that transportation makes the problem worse because at least when a hunter-gatherer kills something, you kill something, then you eat most of it, and then some other animals eat some of the waste or whatever, and it's sort of part of this ongoing system. Right? Transportation takes something that was naturally existing in the environment in a specific place, moves it somewhere else, and gets it consumed there. Right? So it breaks up this energy link of this sort of system. So if you believe what Leopold is saying, there's certain important consequences that follow. Firstly, you've got to stop believing that land is just soil. Right? Land, if you accept his view, land is a whole interdependent system. It's not just the soil, it's not just dirt and the ground. Right? It's much more significant than that. Secondly, he believes that native plants and animals keep this energy circuit open. Foreign plants and animals may not. Right? And Australia has a famous example of this, particularly in the state where I'm from, called the cane toad. So, we grow sugar cane for sugar, and there are these beetles that eat the sugar cane. And so the British, in their wisdom, sort of thought they'd take a species from another country that likes to eat beetles, and they thought, oh, let's introduce that species, and it'll control the beetles, and we'll make much more profit out of sugar. And the problem is that the toad eats everything other than the beetles because it sort of has no predators, and all of the species in Australia don't know what it is, so doesn't identify it as a threat. So it just sits there eating everything. It completely destroys the environment. So that's an example of a foreign plant or an animal destroying the natural energy circuit. So to illustrate Leopold's point. And thirdly, that man-made changes are much more significant than evolutionary changes. So as soon as people start talking about human impacts on the environment, the first thing people respond with is that, evolution's always killed species. Species loss is not a problem. Look at the dinosaurs, they don't exist anymore. Nobody has a problem with the fact that they died out. So why do we care when some frog or rhinoceros or some other plant or animal gets extinct? Right? Animals have always got extinct. New forms of animals get developed. That's natural. Now, Leopold's problem with this is that human impact seems to be much more significant than evolutionary impact. Sure, not every species survives evolution, that's true. Lots of species don't exist before that don't exist now that did before, and that's not necessarily human beings' fault. But there's lots of species that don't exist now that did before that are our fault, and I think the evidence shows that it's actually human beings' impact on the world is much more significant than evolutionary impacts, right? So, and worse still, is that a lot of the impacts that we have can't be intended or predicted. In other words, we've done stuff like the Industrial Revolution, we started burning coal for power. And we thought, this coal stuff, this is great. You burn it, it gives us power. There's heaps of it everywhere. It seems like a limitless way of generating power, and we'll never have a problem, right? And now, 150 years later, we have a big problem. Where carbon dioxide is sort of a major concern. Right? So we do things that it seems revolutionary, it seems like it's not going to be a problem, and then much later, when it's too late, we realize it's a problem. Right? So this picture kind of signifies what Leopold's view is that okay, there's no people in this picture, but that it's a community too, right? So we usually use the word community to describe people. For Leopold, even a natural system is a community as well. So next is Linnaeus, and he's a Norwegian philosopher from the University of Oslo, credited with inventing deep ecology. And deep ecology is basically in contrast with what's called shallow ecology. So for Nace, a shallow ecologist is a person who only cares about the environment because of themselves. It's like a selfish environmentalism, I guess, right? So people who are prepared to worry about the environment, but not prepared to change anything about their self, about themselves that damages the environment. So you want everybody else to change, or you want the government to do something about it, but you don't want to change your own life in order to help the environment, I suppose. So deep ecology involves questioning fundamental human values and reorienting these values, so changing our values in response to certain criticisms. Deep ecology works as a series of levels, and we start with the most superficial of levels, like human behavior. For example, when we leave the classroom today, it would be an environmentalist thing to do to switch off the lights and the air conditioner as we leave the class, right? Now that would make a very small difference in terms of, we'd use less power and produce less carbon and stuff like that. But we wouldn't fundamentally save the environment by switching off the lights, right? You won't fundamentally save the environment by taking a 5-minute shower instead of a 10-minute shower tonight, when you go back to the college or back home. You'll make a small difference, right? So actions on the individual behavior level are significant, but they're not going to make a major difference, right? The deeper we go on these levels, the more of an impact we have. If we change government policy, like we stop pollution from happening by forcing people to make cars in a certain way, or by forcing people to pay for pollution or stuff like that, that's going to make a much bigger difference than just changing individual behavior. Platform principles are like whole ideologies or packages of policies, like a group of policies together. And then number 1 is ultimate values. So the underlying beliefs that we have. Our comprehensive philosophy or religious position. So in other words, if you believe what the Bible says, it's Easter, I suppose, we can discuss the Bible, that God created the world and gave power to man to do whatever he liked with it. It's basically a biblical teaching. Now, that's going to lead you to support much different forms of behavior than if you believe that nature is God. If you're a pantheist, you probably don't want to just randomly destroy nature because you think God's in nature. So you're not going to just smash God. Maybe, I don't know, probably not. Right? So depending on what your ultimate values are, that's more likely to have a big impact on your impact on the environment. Right? If nature is something to be used, that philosophical worldview that nature is something to be used will then lead you to support industrial society. But if nature has intrinsic value, like these ecologists want you to believe, that belief is going to make you support very different things. So people often criticize deep ecologists by saying, oh, you just want us to give up everything we believe in, right? Not strictly true. I mean, Nace is more realistic than that and says, there has to be some sort of way that people with different values can work out what is it that you can agree on and how can you coexist and how can you cooperate on certain things. Right? Through our experiences and self-reflection, shallow ecologists and deep ecologists can usually be brought together around level 2 or something, or level 3, so at the policy level. It doesn't matter why you care about the environment necessarily, to formulate government policy that regulates pollution, or government policy that protects against climate change. The only thing that matters is you care on some level about environmental concerns. Right, so in the end, Nace is proposing certain things. And if you believe these things, he's then going to extend and say there are certain goals you must support. So firstly, the well-being of human and non-human life on Earth have intrinsic value. That's the basic ecologist proposition. So everything that is living has intrinsic value, not just humans. Right? Secondly, these values are independent of usefulness for the non-human world for human purposes. In other words, things are useful even if they're not useful for you. There doesn't have to be usefulness for you for things to have value. It's kind of like human rights arguments. You don't have to be useful for somebody for you to have to respect their human rights. It's a similar argument. Okay, number 3, richness and diversity of life contributes to the realization of these values, but is also a value in itself. So diversity of life forms is good. It's inherently good. Not because it does something for us, it's just good by itself. And therefore, humans have no right to reduce this richness and diversity except to satisfy vital human needs. Now, Nace has no point if you're hungry. He has no problem with you going and feeding yourself at all. Right? He thinks the environment exists as it does. Things kill and eat each other all the time because they're hungry and they need to eat. Right? He's not saying become an ascetic, stop consuming. He's not a Buddhist. He's not saying, cut your impact on the world by self-denial or something like that, right? He's saying you can still eat, you can still satisfy your vital human needs, but beyond your basic need to survive, don't have all of these other impacts, like all this other stuff, like consumption levels and maintaining this huge standard of living, this huge impact that we have on the world is not valid. Satisfying your human needs is valid. Nobody should be hungry, but beyond that, there's no justification for the impact that we have on the world that we do. So therefore, he's saying that the flourishing of human life and culture is compatible with a substantial decrease in human population. And here's where ecologists run into a big sort of tension with lots of other worldviews that say there's nothing wrong with population growth. There's certain religious and non-religious views that say population growth is a good thing, right? Economists talk about a demographic dividend, for example, where big population growth is a helpful thing, right? Ecologists have a great problem with it because they look at human population growth and they see impact. The more people there are, the less space there is for all of the other species. Right? So he'll argue that the flourishing of non-human life requires a decrease in population. He made this argument decades ago. So the population is much bigger than it was at the time he said this. So if he was alive today, he'd be very unhappy with the way the world is, right? Because there's even more people. He wanted less, but there's more, right? So the present human interference with the world is excessive, and the situation is rapidly worsening, right? So according to Nace, even our current level of consumption is too much, and the more things grow, the worse things get, right? So the reverse is the reality, right? The policies have to be changed to reverse economic growth. And in order to do this, he says that, well, we need to change our basic economic, technological, and ideological structures. In other words, we need to change lots of things about what we believe. And that the resulting state of affairs are going to be very different from what they are now. But at the same time, he's not saying we have to become sad, right? He's not saying you have to live miserably. People like Nace are saying, well, you need to think about what makes you happy. Can you have quality of life without an economically higher standard of living? Do you really need every family in the world to have 3 cars? Do you really need every person to have 50 shirts? Do you really need all that stuff? Or can we be just as happy with less stuff? Do you really need 5 children? Can you be just as happy with 1? Was China right? Was the one-child policy right? Can you be just as happy with 1 child? Would that be better for everybody? Would that be better for the non-human world? So, in other words, there's this big difference between having a great society and having a big society, having a great economy and having a big economy. And so, like, currently everybody believes that the biggest economy is the best, and everybody's obsessed with growing and becoming the biggest, right? So Nace's overall point here is that, well, being the biggest is not necessarily being the best. Being the biggest is not necessarily being the happiest. Yeah, if you work 23 hours a day, you can probably produce more stuff, but you'll also probably be very miserable and die, right? So, the same goes for the world, okay? Lastly, he says if we believe all of these things, You can't just believe it in a vacuum now. I've caught you in my trap. And if you accept my argument, you're now morally obligated to do something about it. You can't just believe all this stuff and then not do anything, okay? If you accept what I'm saying, he says, you now have a moral obligation to do what you can to change the world. You know, to sort of change people's mind and change government policy and change yourself as well, right? To change the world and make it better, okay? So the last theorist we'll look at is Garrett Hardin, who's an American environmentalist, famous for inventing the concept of the tragedy of commons, which is kind of like, you know, imagine that there's four farmers, and each of them has one cow, and there's land that's held commonly, and the cows just eat whatever they want, right? So in this example, every farmer has an incentive to get a second cow, and then a third cow, and then a 50th cow, right? Because individually they can make more profit the more cows that they have. The problem is that collectively you reach a point where the environment gets destroyed because there's too many cows and they destroy everything, right? So what this tragedy of commons is designed to demonstrate is there's a contradiction between what's rational for the individual, you know, to make individually more profit, and what's rational for the society as a whole. Because if everybody tries to make more profit immediately at all times, we end up destroying ourselves, right? So that's the point of his paper. And he's also the creator of lifeboat ethics, we'll look at in a moment. So there's a YouTube link for the tragedy of commons in a much more entertaining way than what I just described it. I think it's like a cartoon or something. So check out the cartoon. Hardin's argument is that popular morality and many types of political theory are focused on individual rights. And again, like here's another Western theorist who has a problem with Western liberalism and individual rights. You know, so it's like not everybody believes the same thing, is what I'm saying. So the environment is a whole system. And the tragedy of the commons example demonstrates how individual behaviours can have system-level damages. Everybody tries to make profit in the short term, and as a result, destroys the system as a whole. Right? Now, specifically, how does this become a problem? It's a problem because, he says, of population growth. So, the United Nations gives people the right to have as many children as they want. It does this, for example, in Article 4 of the UN Declaration on Social Progress and Development. Right? The right to have as many children as you like is currently considered a human right. Okay? And Hardin has a big problem with this. He's like, well, that's insane. You know, you give people the right to have as many children as they want, you're basically giving people the right to destroy the world. You know, you're giving people the right to destroy the world by human impact. You know, that's a very dangerous thing. So he's saying, well, these individual rights, they're actually not that great. You know, they're going to cause social level destruction. You might think it's a good thing to give individuals the right to have as many children as they like. But the end consequences of this is total social disaster.